We are about to embark on a truly epic 3,000-year journey. In this explainer, we're going to chart the dramatic rise, the magnificent peak, and the eventual fall of one of the most mesmerizing civilizations in human history, ancient Egypt. We are talking about a society that stood strong for over 3 millennia. It's an incredible story of monumental ambition, legendary rulers, and a literal quest for eternity that still completely captivates us today.
To really understand how this empire was born, we have to start by looking at its geography. And it is a stark, almost unbelievable contrast. On one hand, you have the Sahara Desert, right? Just a harsh, endless wasteland of completely arid, golden dunes. But slicing directly through that barren landscape is a vibrant, miraculous vein of green life, the Nile River. It's this exact geographical contradiction that made this entire empire possible in the first place.
The ancient Greek historian Herodotus really hit the nail on the head when he famously stated, "Egypt is the gift of the Nile." And he was absolutely right, because without this single legendary river, and specifically without its predictable annual flooding, this civilization simply would never have existed. The Nile wasn't just a body of water, it was the literal heartbeat of an empire.
So here is our roadmap for today. We'll kick off with our foundation in the gift of the Nile, move straight into unification and the pyramids, and then meet the pharaohs of the Golden Age. After that, we'll take a look at faith, death, and daily life, witness the eclipse of the empire, and finally uncover the eternal legacy. Let's dive right in.
Starting off with Chapter 1, the gift of the Nile, which is the literal agricultural groundwork of ancient Egypt.
When those annual floodwaters finally receded every year, they left behind something absolutely crucial, called Kemet. Now this translates to the Black Land. It was this rich, dark, incredibly fertile layer of silt. Because of this, large-scale agriculture wasn't just possible, it thrived, right in the middle of a desert. This dark soil is what allowed riverside communities to blossom, laying the bedrock for an empire that would stand the test of time.
Which brings us to our second section, unification and the pyramids. This is where we see the early consolidation of power and the dawn of truly massive architecture.
To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of what we're dealing with, we have to look at the timeline. We are starting way back at 3100 BCE with unification, moving through the Old Kingdom, which gave us the pyramids, transitioning into the glittering New Kingdom, and finally reaching the empire's fall to Rome in 30 BCE. The pacing and lifespan of this civilization are just absolutely immense.
Let's zero in on that very first date. Around 3100 BCE, King Narmer did something totally unprecedented. He essentially merged two completely distinct worlds, Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north, into a single unified kingdom. By wearing the combined crown of both realms, Narmer established the divine tradition of the pharaoh. This bold move officially birthed the Old Kingdom, ushering in an era of absolute stability and highly centralized power.
And it was during this Old Kingdom that the pharaohs really began to build for eternity. But we have to stop here and correct a massive historical misconception. The Great Pyramids of Giza were not built by slaves. Actually, scratch that myth entirely. They were engineered and erected by tens of thousands of highly skilled, well-paid laborers. Built as royal tombs for kings like Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, these breathtaking engineering marvels were literally designed as launch pads to send the divine king's souls straight into the heavens. Okay, moving into Chapter 3, Pharaohs of the Golden Age. We are shifting past the Middle Kingdom and stepping right into the spectacular, towering climax of this civilization.
The New Kingdom was Egypt's absolute golden age of military dominance and monumental splendor. This era produced the legendary rulers whose names we still know today. You have Hatshepsut, a brilliant female pharaoh who prioritized building vast trade networks of her military conquest. Then there's Akhenaten, this massive revolutionary who just upended centuries of tradition by enforcing monotheism, worshipping only the sun disk, the Aten. Of course, we have the famous boy king, Tutankhamun, whose astonishingly intact tomb finally showed the modern world the sheer, mind-blowing opulence of the royal court. And finally, Ramesses II, Ramses the Great. He was a master builder and a fierce warrior who ruled for over 6 decades, leaving behind colossal monuments like Abu Simbel.
Now, as fascinating as the kings and the monuments are, let's move to Section 4, Faith, Death, and Daily Life.
Let's pause the grand historical timeline for a moment to really ground ourselves in the human element of this society.
You see, for the ancient Egyptians, religion wasn't just something they thought about once a week. It was the absolute framework of their reality, a complex pantheon of gods, like the sun god Ra, or Osiris, the ruler of the underworld, guided literally every single aspect of existence. And you can see this deep intertwining of faith and daily life in their hieroglyphics. This wasn't just a complex system of pictorial writing for keeping records. These were considered the sacred words of the gods. It was the actual method through which the divine communicated with the mortal world.
Because they believed so strongly in this divine reality, securing eternal life was a massive, highly specific spiritual undertaking. The steps were incredibly intricate and solemn. First, the physical body had to be perfectly preserved. Then, through really complex rituals, priests actively transformed the deceased person into an immortal being. Finally, they surrounded them with those sacred texts to safely guide them through the dangers of the afterlife.
But it's so important to remember that they weren't just a culture obsessed with death. Beyond the shadow of those grand tombs was a surprisingly vibrant, bustling, everyday society. If you were walking along the riverbanks back then, you'd see farmers working the fields, artisans meticulously crafting delicate gold jewelry, and scribes diligently managing imperial records. It was a thriving, deeply human community.
Sadly, as we transition to our fifth section, we have to acknowledge one of the most universal truths of history. No empire stands forever. The eclipse of the empire.
Over time, the immense power of the pharaohs started to erode. Internal divisions, heavy economic strain, and looming external threats brought in successive waves of conquerors. By the 6th century BCE, the Persian conquest absorbed Egypt. Then, in 332 BCE, Alexander the Great arrived on the scene, claiming Egypt and founding Alexandria, which kicked off nearly 3 centuries of Greek pharaohs. The curtain finally, tragically fell in 30 BCE. Following the death of the legendary Queen Cleopatra, Egypt was formally annexed and became just another province of the sprawling Roman Empire.
Seeing an empire that stood for over 3,000 years fall to Rome is a pretty heavy thought. But it brings us to a really powerful question. Does an empire of that magnitude ever truly vanish?
That perfectly tees up our final section, the eternal legacy. Because while the age of the pharaohs absolutely passed into history, their civilization never actually died. It is quietly immortalized in our daily lives today.
The breakthroughs that came out of ancient Egypt are literally foundational to the modern world we live in right now. Their pioneering architectural methods went on to heavily inspire Greek and Roman classicism. Their early medical papyri laid the crucial groundwork for early science and surgery. Just think about how we measure time. Their 365-day calendar system shaped the very one we use today. And their advancements in written language broke open entirely new doors for human expression. Their fingerprints are absolutely everywhere.
So what should you really take away from all of this? Thousands of years later, those monuments constructed along the banks of the Nile still stand. They remain there as silent, eternal guardians of a civilization that continues to shape who we are. The ancient Egyptians spent 3 millennia completely obsessing over how to achieve eternal life. But when you look at their enduring legacy in our architecture, our medicine, and even our calendars, doesn't it make you wonder if this 5,000-year-old society actually achieved the immortality they were always searching for? Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today. Keep exploring, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.